Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are really happy to be sharing the important lessons learned from building an after-school system in a frontier region, namely the state of Wyoming. I'm Corey Newhouse, the founder and principal of Public Profit. We work with mission-driven organizations to help them use data to improve the quality of their work and expand their benefit to communities. I am the very, very proud co-editor of Measure, Use, Improve, Data Use and Out-of-School Time. And we are really fortunate to have authors of one of the chapters of the book, which is talking about how they built a statewide system for out-of-school time from the ground up. On the next slide, we'll show you their names. We're really happy to welcome Linda Barton, the former director of the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance and a multi-year expert in the out-of-school time field. Ellen Gannett, who's the former director of NIOST, who has extensive workforce and system building expertise in the out-of-school time field, and Kathy Schleier, who is the NIOST director of training. What's on tap for us today is we are each going to hear from first Linda, then Ellen, then Kathy, sharing some of their insights and lessons learned from the multi-year effort to build a really comprehensive out-of-school time system in Wyoming. I've got some questions for our panelists to ask them about insights they care to share, things they have learned. And then we want to turn it over to you all to hear questions and answers from you. We will do our very best to address them here today. And then we'll have a couple next steps to share with this group. If you are interested in asking a question, please do use the Q&A box at the bottom right hand. If you're having any technical issues, can't hear us, can't see us, wish we talk slower, wish we talk faster, you can use the chat function. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Linda, who's going to get us started.
Well, good afternoon. It's so nice to sort of see all of you and be back talking about my favorite subject, which is after school, and particularly in Wyoming. So this is a picture of Red Canyon, Wyoming, and as you can see, we're a very rural state. But I'd like to go ahead and start chatting with you about how we developed and launched our statewide system. So I started an after-school program in 2007 for a school district here. So it was a school-based 21st century program. That was back in 2000, and I had absolutely no experience in running an after-school program, and I think many of you can relate to that. So the population of Lander is about 7,500 people. It's a very small community. And I was the director of Lights On in Lander for 14 years. And during that time, the only available state resources in those days was through the Department of Education and really mostly focused on grant management. And so since we were all very new to 21st century community learning centers and new in Wyoming to the federal grant, we really didn't have a lot of technical resources to go to since we were such a rural state. And what later on we'll show you the demographics and you can see for yourself. So during my tenure, I had so much to learn and I didn't really know where to turn. So I started going to national conferences with the hope that I could gain some knowledge about how to run an after-school program in really a frontier state, because that's what we're designated as. But I soon found out that there really wasn't a lot of information, and that the sessions that I would attend, when they talked about rural, in my view, they were really looking at more suburban or rural programs that might have been 50 miles from an urban center. And none of that really worked for us because we're hundreds of miles away from anything. So had the opportunity at one of the conferences to sit in a session with the NIOST group. And I was so impressed with their tools and thought that that might be the answer to really looking at how I, at that time, could implement some professional development that would really work for us. And that's what we're actually talking about today. So during the time that I was running the program, in 2007, I also had the opportunity to found the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance, which is a statewide after-school network with the CS Mod Foundation. And this was a turning point for us because we were rolling out a statewide system in which we would be providing technical resources and assistance to all of the programs. And my hope as an individual provider myself, and having worked in the trenches for all of those years, I wanted the other programs in Wyoming to have an availability of services that they could turn to. So I went to some APAS trainings in Boston and had an opportunity to talk with Ellen at that time and to learn about how the process would be to start building a system for us. So we contracted with NIOST, and we also contracted with a Third Mile Group out of Denver, Colorado, to start looking at how, from the ground up, and that is literally true, how we could start building a system of professional development and continuous quality improvement. So with the help of Third Mile Group, the very first thing we did was to implement a needs assessment, because we really needed to understand what the actual issues were out there in the field. Now, I knew from my own experience what I needed, but we really wanted to hear what everyone needed. So if you'd like to change the slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see, Wyoming is a really interesting place. I'm not sure that everybody actually knows where it is. Anyway, we are a huge state with 97,000 square miles and basically 577,000 citizens, or 6 people per square mile. So you can see the issues that we deal with. We are actually considered a frontier state by the US Census. And I had talked with Ellen. They were coming out here to actually do some work and meet with our programs. And I said to her, Ellen, when you land in Casper, you're just going to be shocked. And so the first thing she said to me is, I wouldn't have believed it unless I saw it for myself. So what we really got out of the needs assessment were very interesting key elements that we were going to focus on. But before I get to that, here are some of the issues that we had. And also to go back a little bit and give you a context, the largest city in Wyoming, which is our capital, Cheyenne, has only 63,000 people in it. And then the next biggest city is Casper, Wyoming, with 53. And then it's downhill from there. So we have about 38 21st century programs in the state, spread out by hundreds of miles apart from each other in small communities all over the state. What we found is it's really hard to collaborate, to visit programs, and learn from one another. Travel is difficult at best, and it's very time consuming. It requires an overnight stay for most of our trips. And of course, the weather conditions can be truly awful here, making traveling impossible. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see, there's vast stretches of land, small towns, long winters, least populated state, difficult travel, all of those things we were just talking about. And so we really needed a way to find, to develop some professional development that would work in our natural environment. So we started to embark upon the tools with APAS, and again, going back to the needs assessment, here were the elements and actually the priorities that our programs were saying they needed. Funding was a really big issue because in Wyoming, we don't have very many private foundations and we have less corporate foundations. Some of the corporations do business in Wyoming, but their headquarters are not in Wyoming. So they have very little incentive to contribute to after-school programs in our state. Transportation was another huge issue, as I mentioned before, really difficult. For me, from my little town in Lander, it takes about 4.5 hours to get to Cheyenne to do any kind of business. And then there was a lack of adequate staffing and quality controls, and we also needed a lot more programs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Linda. There I am. Well, hello, everyone. Delighted to be here and to join this panel. You know, the issues that the needs assessment highlighted for us were quite revealing because, you know, NIOST and our team, we had been working in system building and quality improvement for decades, actually. And the rules of the game were quite different. As Linda pointed out, it was that famous flight to Casper, Wyoming, where I realized, whoa, I'm in a different ballpark altogether in developing our system of quality development. We had to embark on this work in a very different way. We had to do things that would be responsive to the providers' needs, to the workforce, to the families of Wyoming, and to make some major adaptations to the systems that we had previously used in cities and in many states. One thing we recognized early on was that the programs were mostly on their own. They didn't have a sense of being able to meet regularly with each other. And in addition, they didn't seem to have a common definition of quality that would be able to drive their work. The game that we were needing to play had to re-examine, most importantly, the speed by which we were going to be able to work. We thought, for example, that we would be able to convene a cadre of coaches or technical advisors during our first year. And I think that was quite indicative of some of the realities that we had to face, that things were not going to move at the same pace. So we had to take one step at a time, always being responsive to the unique characteristics of the demographics and the characteristics of the workforce. The model that you're about to see in the next slide played a very important role in guiding us, but most importantly, in setting a vision for where we wanted to go over time. As you can see from this model, a typical quality system building approach would include, first and foremost, the definition of what quality is, often by articulating a set of core competencies and standards of program quality. We needed to recognize that assessment and the use of tools and data to engage providers in continuous quality improvement would be an essential element, as would be our support for professional development, for coaching, technical assistance, and mentoring. And perhaps even setting up systems for credentialing higher education and coursework for career development and pathways. All along, this outer rim that you see in this system is what we call the safeguards for quality improvement, which would include your partnerships with funders, your partnerships with school systems, your advocacy work, your communication channels, and your ability to improve and incorporate all kinds of ways to make sure that a system would be sustainable. All along this system about outcomes for staff, positive outcomes for children and youth, and the positive outcomes for programs. So as we were building this initiative, we realized that this model, while very effective in working in some cities and states, we were going to have a problem in moving forward because we didn't have the competencies. We didn't necessarily start off with a set of program practices or standards. We didn't have necessarily the ongoing funding from private foundations or public entities, at least not in the beginning. And now we're thrilled because 21st Century is very much a player in our public funding structure. We didn't have the coaching. We didn't have the technical advisors. So in many ways, we were starting from scratch. Kathy is now going to describe this journey of how we adapted and how we supported program quality by first building capacity at the program level and thinking about how leadership could grow from the inside out. Kathy?
Thanks, Ellen. And also I want to give a thank you, of course, to the Afterschool Alliance, and a big shout out for those of you who are here, not only from around the country, but especially from Wyoming, seeing some friends and some folks who have been part of this initiative for a very long time. So it's really great to see you here. So when we started, as we mentioned, it was all about continuous quality improvement and working with programs directly. So the very first thing we did, of course, was to set upon some training. And so that meant physically taking a team, going to Wyoming. And that started the annual visits to take training to Wyoming. And that was both a really important piece, obviously, for training, but also really to help build community, because that's really what we were about. You know, one of the things Linda talked about was those vast distances between programs. And so it was really important to get folks to know one another and to have them be able to build their own community together and sort of learn together. So that really was step one. And we started with training on our quality tools. And we started training them as coaches with this first group. It was about 17 programs, 17 people. And these were all folks that Linda, through her days as a director, knew of them and encouraged them. And they were excited about the idea and were happy to come together. And I think that's really key. You know, when you're starting on this work, none of this was required. They were 21st century programs, but it was all voluntary. So folks wanted to come, they wanted to be there. So they came, they did those two trainings, and we initially got all excited because, as Ellen said, when Linda wanted, we were going to set up a group of coaches right away. We assigned them programs, and we're going to send them off to go do observations of other programs. And that was our real first lesson learned, that the travel season is short, the amount of time it takes to go between programs, and also that the programs didn't really know each other well enough. So the idea of someone coming from the outside to observe them, even though we talked about the fact that we're not coming to look at you, we're not coming to do personal evaluations, didn't quite feel right. So that's another thing, is that was our big lesson learned, that so instead of having sort of external coaches, we immediately switched to internal coaches. And we still use that model today, where coaches work on supporting their own programs, and yet, they still communicate with one another and learn from each other, but they're primarily working with their own program. So we've been doing a lot of ongoing training and coaching over the years. As part of the pilot, that was 3+ years of training and a lot of data collection. They were collecting data on the quality observations tools. They were collecting survey data. And this was part of the process that was teaching them, as Ellen mentioned, this idea of a common understanding of quality, in particular, understanding about youth engagement, and having strong relationships with adults, and the idea of intentionality around programs design and activities. And so with that work and our work as coaches, we had several people from NIOST assigned as coaches to the programs. We were serving as the coaches to the coach, and we wanted to make sure that was we were always there for help and reference, because in the beginning, it's a very, very slow process. The first 2 years, programs did action plans, but they weren't required, because we wanted to make sure that it was sort of becoming part of the way you do things, but going at a very gradual place, always wanting to sort of meet everybody where they were. So if you move to the next slide, I think I'll just say, this is all about using data, and we've talked about tools. So I'm not going to go into depth on the APAS tool system, but just wanted to mention it because, we've referred to it. You can go to our NIOST website and learn all about it. But primarily it's a set of tools, at the high level. It's about developing quality practices that then lead to positive experiences that then help form outcomes that can help with social emotional learning and skill building. And so we started in the first 2 years doing observations with quality data and collecting survey data, surveys of the adults, the staff in the programs who were measuring engagement in learning. In particular, we wanted folks to have one common measure. They could choose an additional 1 or 2 measures, but we wanted to make sure that we had one common measure across the programs. And now, years later, they're using the SAOY as well, which is the youth survey tool. So they use all components of the program. Now, of course, this means that there's a lot of data being collected, right? So we want to use data that you actually will be able to work on. And so that's something that in particular that we were very thinking a lot about. In fact, to this day, we think a lot about it, because one of the things is that some of the programs are a bit larger, maybe what you would call a center, but many of the programs are quite small. So the director of the program or the coach may also be the staff, or their staff may be high school students or college students. And so it's really important that in building capacity of that program, you're sort of understanding how you're doing that support. So if you go to the next slide, thank you. This is sort of really how we think about it. And if you, for those, many of you know about that process of continuous quality improvement, which is using data to then set goals. That's really at the core of this work. So that's represented by this green square. And then, that is supported in turn by ongoing training and coaching, and then programs gaining the confidence, and not only at the director level, but also at the staff level, and then helping them in turn be able to have this work be ongoing. I think, one of the great strengths of this program too is that when the Wyoming Department of Education joined up with the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance, so right about 2014, I think it was, the Karen Bierhaus, who's the coordinator for the 21st century, she knows Linda, and they had talked, and so Karen was talking to some of the program leaders, and they were enthusiastic about the tools. And so that in turn helped bring real stability to this work. In fact, and to this day, it's really having that funding source and that commitment. Now there's about, as we said, about 38 programs statewide that are engaged in the work and using the data and connecting. So that's sort of, I think, a short description of where we are. And I think our next step is to sort of open it up and see if there's some questions for folks, right?
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Kathy, Linda, and Ellen. Really appreciate each of you and sharing your insights. I have a couple of questions for our authors to start us off, and again, really encourage and invite colleagues who are joining us today to use the Q&A feature to ask us additional questions. We have plenty of time for that as well. You know, just to reflect on some of the things that I heard you all mention, and sounds like some of the mindset shifts maybe that those of us who are maybe in more rural, or pardon me, more urban areas and suburban areas need to think about is availability of funding. Linda, you mentioned companies may be based may have operations in a rural state or frontier state, but may not be making grants there. And so how to think creatively about funding. I know you all mentioned the CS Mott Foundation and partnerships with your state's 21st Century Community Learning Centers office. But that does seem like a really important consideration, as we know, many regions, other regions of the country, just because of their zip code, may have greater access to private funding, and that does make a difference. So again, just want to acknowledge that I heard that, and that clearly is of course, everyone in the rural and frontier regions are like, yeah, Corey, obviously, but seems like a really important thing to take into consideration for those of us who are in more urban or suburban settings. Speaking of mindset shifts, Ellen, I would love to hear from you first. You mentioned your famous first flight to Casper. What mindset shift did you and the NIOST team need to make when it came to working in rural and frontier regions like Wyoming?
Well, I'll speak personally first, how it affected me. As a national trainer, I thrive on connection, physical connection, and have always loved being able to travel the country and meet people from all over, and have a chance to work really closely with folks during our training sessions and our coaching sessions. And in the many years that we worked in Wyoming, we were often not seeing each other from, once a year, maybe, or year to year. And that was a little hard for me. That was a shift in thinking about how to stay connected. We supplemented those trainings with, in the beginning, conference calls. We didn't have Zoom, or we weren't using it at any rate. And so we were often on big conference calls with 30 or more people, and we realized how hard that was for people to really share what was going on with their lives and with their programs and their young children. And I often remember being on a call and asking a question or opening up a topic, and there would be this deadly silence. And so I was like, oh, Kathy, let's do something. We got to figure something out here. Thank goodness for this type of technology. I think it really opened up an amazing opportunity, and it really helped with this isolation that I think so many programs have felt in the state of Wyoming when they're so far apart.
And Ellen, I wonder, I want to stick with this for just a moment. Kind of for you, you mentioned kind of the shift you made as a trainer and just kind of adjusting to less in-person. Remember that in-person interactions. I wonder if there were also things that kind of ahas that you had about some of the ways that you had structured the engagement, that like the way that you were thinking about NIOST's role that needed to be changed, but because of the frontier setting in Wyoming.
Yeah, Kathy mentioned the importance of the role of the coach's coach. And I think we had to be very effective in that way, that we gave guidance, very clear guidance about how that the program directors and the site coordinators could then pass on to their own staff. So it was a capacity building approach that was so critical, that we were giving skills and tools and information to site coordinators so that they could then work effectively with their own team. That wasn't necessarily a change, but it became a very critical component for a frontier state, because we just weren't going to be able to have an impact at each one of these programs. One of the things that we have always loved to do is to do site visits. And, you know, frankly, I wasn't able to see many programs at all over those years. I only got to know programs through these kinds of technologies, or through our calls and our annual trainings.
Thank you, Ellen. And Kathy, I'd love to hear from you, from your role as a coach, sort of lessons learned about the role that technology plays for coaching in these rural and frontier settings.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Ellen really hit the nail on the head when she was talking about that. I really can't say enough about how technology, the shift in technology has been so beneficial for Wyoming. I mean, I think a lot of us have learned about that during the pandemic. You know, we've gotten a little tired of Zoom, or we're thinking, you know, that, you know, it is what it is. But on the other hand, I think that for places where it's really physically hard to get together, and in particular where it may happen once a year or not even, I mean, for instance, this year we couldn't go. So we actually, you know, reinvented the training to try to bring everybody together as best we could for 2 days over using the Zoom platform. And so, and we continue to do that with regular Zoom calls that we have each month. And both, we have sort of two different groups. We have what we call sort of the capacity builders, you know, those who are within the first, second, or third year of learning the process of continuous quality improvement. And then we have sort of the ongoing coaches group, which continues to meet, and they continue to learn from each other. And they're really the, you know, they're the boots on the ground of the stability and the capacity building. And I mean, they are now bringing up the next generation of folks doing this work. And so I think that technology has been really wonderful for them to, you know, they can now get in touch with each other even when we're not. And the technology facilitates them feeling like they can be together.
Thank you. And Kathy, as I was listening to you speak, it reminded me of something that we spoke about in one of our prior conversations preparing for this session, that one of the things that you all noticed, Kathy and Ellen in particular, was the longevity of some of the program staff, that while maybe line staff are cycling in and out, many of the program coordinators, program leaders have been with their program for a very long time, and that feels like a huge asset, especially in settings like this where it really is that trainer of trainers. It really is focusing on the capacity of the staff who are directly working with young people, directly supervising staff, and they're around, and that feels like a really huge asset. Well,
that is a big asset. Linda, you can speak to this too, because I think this is where we think of the, there aren't that many people if you want to hire, I mean, Linda, you can talk about this, but we used to hear this, you know, there aren't as many people to hire. And so when you lose your staff, you're really searching for that next person, right?
Well, I can tell you that from personal experience, when I started in 2000, the same coordinators and directors are still around. We've known each other for 20 years and beyond. So it's really nice to see that there's a stability of consistency program, building. That experience, as Ellen and Kathy said, get transferred down to new staff. But I think it gets easier for the directors and the coaches to do that because they have been in their positions for so long and have gone through years of learning, working together and developing their own relationships with each other, which has been a beautiful thing to see, really.
And Linda, I have a question for you in just one sec, but just to reflect something that I've heard you all mention is that technology clearly plays a role, and it sounds like those more at a distance interactions really thrive when after folks have had a chance to meet each other, to build some relationships. Just appreciating we are social creatures, and that even if it is a big lift, a long drive, an overnight stay, to have that in-person connection, at least at some point. Because Kathy, what you described is sort of folks who've known each other for a while, being able to stay in community, rely on each other. But just thinking about those who are on the call who are thinking about their own initiatives, creating some intentional opportunities for folks to really get to know each other, build that trust, build that familiarity before you start moving in on, hey, that interaction with that kid, did you do that training on that thing, whatever it might be. Seems like it's important to sustain those relationships.
It is. And there's always new people coming in too. I mean, it's not to say that there isn't turnover, because we know people's life circumstances change, right?
Yeah.
I think another aspect of the unique Wyoming scene is many of the programs are quite small. And so it was about realizing that they were very rooted in community, and everyone knew everyone, and even being able to share their important data with their school administration, for example, was I think a really important piece. They were invited to go to school board meetings, and that was just the way you do business. You kind of show up at community meetings, and being able to talk about what did we learn from the data, what's happening in terms of program improvement and the outcomes for young people in our community. It was a very intimate process, and we love being able to hear these stories that really spoke to the idea of small town. It's a small town kind of thing. And it was great. It was very, very effective. And people were hungry to share these stories with each other, share, the positive presentations that they made at the school board meeting, or a conversation they had with their school principal, or getting down to some of the curriculum that they were able to use. It was the sharing of these kinds of ideas and concepts and experiences that made the work so worthwhile.
One of the things that I want to add to that, when Ellen talked about small communities, many of these programs are so small that the directors are actually also working in the activities. And the challenge of that was, with small staff, maybe 2 or 3 people, with trying to get the directors trained as coaches was very challenging, because if they had to leave, then they lost a staff member. They weren't sitting in their offices while the rest of the staff was working, because they were actually wearing doing dual roles. So we had to figure out a way to get around that, and that's where the idea of internal coaching became extremely valuable and important. And the trust among their own programs of each other was critical. So
thank you, Linda.
You know, I'm seeing a couple of questions in the Q&A that folks might like to get the answer from. And I think, like, for instance, there's one that I'm seeing, and I'm not sure I can answer it, which is sort of why I'm bringing it up. But it says, do programs charge a fee for students attending? And I think my sense of this is that they're 21st century programs, so there are not fees charged. But Linda, do you know the answer to that?
Well, initially when I was running our program, we did charge a very small fee. It was like, you know, $3 a day. But, and mainly I did that because I needed some extra money to turn back and buy resources. However, the 21st century right now I don't believe that the programs are charging, and maybe we can hear from some other folks if that is the case. But if they are charging, it's nominal. It's very nominal. I mean, you know, it's reasonable for people of low income status to be able to pay $1 a day or whatever they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, maybe some of our Wyoming folks can answer that in the chat box.
And a reminder to respond to the panelists and attendees. Thank you, Zoom, for your not very helpful preset. Well, Linda, you know, since we're talking about 21st century community learning centers, wanted to hear from you. It's clear that Wyoming's 21st century programs office was a huge, you know, it was and is a major partner in this effort. And so we'd love to hear what it was like to kind of merge or blend or combine, whichever verb you choose, your quality improvement efforts, the work that you were doing with NIOST with some of the requirements and priorities for the 21st century office.
Well, and that was an evolution. The first 3 years that we did the pilot, at that time, the state consultant was not really involved with our project. However, after we had 3 years of very, very positive results, and really we're starting to see some growth, you know, professional development growth and positive youth outcomes. As I think either Ellen or Kathy mentioned prior, is that the incoming state consultant, who I happened to work with in Lander and knew quite well, basically asked the programs if they wanted to continue with this particular tool, because she was looking at some sort of tools to bring into the state. And there was an overwhelming desire to keep with the APAS tools because, number one, they were used to them, but they were also very user-friendly. And the outcomes that we were seeing were really impressive after the first 3 years. And especially we learned a lot from action plans. The action plans were really eye-opener. And you could look at the action plans and then align what was needed to be able to coach on, because we wanted the student engagement, which would have cured some of the action plan ideas. Let me just say it like that, you know, right? So, but I think that now the 21st century, the state has been, and with Karen Beerhouse leading the charge on this and working closely with NIOST, has been a game changer for the state. It really has been. And I think because of the funding issues that we had, that has been able to make all the difference in terms of continuous program improvement, but also in the training and providing those programs the foundation that they need. And we did, as we went along, we did merge the 21st century objectives for grant management in conjunction with the APAS tools, so that there was really an alignment from sort of a prong of everything coming together to mesh. And that was a learning experience, because there were some nuances to the two different tools, but I think it's been very successful and solved two problems at once.
Yeah, no, I think that particularly today, I think there's sort of questions about, metrics, what's been reported back to grantors and whatnot. And, the 21st century grants, they require some attention to, English language arts and to math. But what we were doing is what is more foundational. So we sort of set the groundwork for the continuous quality improvement and understanding quality and doing the observations and understanding engagement. And that work sort of forms the basis to then make it a bit easier to do things that are now at a much higher level across the state, with literacy programs and STEM initiatives and other things that really help infuse that additional, challenge or learning to youth, but that, sort of needed to have that basis of that understanding of quality as the foundation to be able to go to the next level.
Just to elaborate, Kathy, on that foundational work, it really included the foundations of positive youth development, social and emotional learning, understanding about human development, child development. These are some of the very basics that we were able to start with, that then became, as you said, the floor, so that all of these other much more sophisticated initiatives would build on top of all of the rest. And so we, being able to see the group become so much more sophisticated over the years has been really remarkable. I'm very, very proud of it. Of all the providers that we've worked with over the years, it's been really a privilege to be able to do that and to be connected still after more than a decade of work together.
So we have a question from Belle Cantor in Oregon. So we're going to fix Oregon's problems. Thank you. She's got a question around, we have mentioned turnover for programs, and we know that's an endemic challenge in this field. She writes that sometimes when there is turnover, it means that the programs end or that they change so much that the quality improvement work kind of stops or that they aren't able to sustain it. Curious how you all have found ways, if any, to address that in your work in Wyoming.
Well, who wants to tackle that one?
Corey, could you repeat that question? I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat box.
Sure thing. And this is in the Q&A from Belle. She says that there's there are rural and urban programs that her foundation is supporting. And when they experience turnover, sometimes they find that programs either end altogether or are not able to sustain their quality improvement work because of the turnover. And she was interested to hear just any ways that you all in Wyoming have found to address that or adapt to that.
Well, it's just a continuous process. I mean, there's no real cure for it. It's just a matter of which is the benefit of having the internal coaches from their own programs, because when they can hire someone new, it's easier for them to wrap them into the fold and train them. It's a longer term process. It takes a while, and I do know that many times if the programs are really small, it is hard to find even the most minimal qualified human resources in a very small community of 3,000 or, it's tough. So it's just a matter of hooking on to continuing to search and then train, search and then train.
So in addressing this problem, which is very, very common, when the leadership is rooted in one individual who then leaves, and the program then can suffer greatly because the notion of quality hasn't permeated throughout the entire staff, and the leadership opportunities has also not permeated throughout all levels of staff. And I think the lesson here, especially in rural and frontier communities, is to make sure that that the director isn't the only one that knows what's going on. When that happens, and for goodness sake, if that director leaves, then of course you'll be in trouble. But if the knowledge and the leadership is spread across a team approach where everybody gets to collaborate and contribute, I think you set a foundation that will be able to sustain some measure of turnover, and hopefully will prevent the program from closing down. So making sure that everyone has a voice at the table when they're talking about quality and program improvement.
And I think another really key quality of a good director is they think of themselves as a peer with everyone else. There's not, they may be the one who's responsible and where the buck stops, for issues that come up, but they're not just part of they're part of the team, but they're one of the team. They're not, out of the loop in a way. They're not so high up that they, that's what I found when running a program, was being there with them every step of the way. It was a team effort, yes.
I did have one more question from Teresa in the Q&A. She writes that her program focuses on the most needing students and helping them wherever they might need help. Do your programs follow state guidelines for ratios, or did you develop your own to individually assist students? And that, I would imagine that's a very program specific question, but maybe there was some guidance for the 21st century programs in your state.
Our programs are so small, I'm not sure we have a ratio.
Well, yes, I was gonna say there aren't that many regulations in Wyoming, right? That's right. It's not.
Yet another asset from rural and frontier.
That's right.
But before we turn it over to each of the panelists and ask them for their parting advice, something, Linda, that you mentioned in one of our prep calls that just really resonated with me, and that with a very few exceptions, there are rural and frontier regions in every single state of the country. Yes. Rhode Island, probably not you. Connecticut, probably not you, but everywhere else in our country. And I think that that's just such a great point of view for all of us to be holding in our minds, that regardless of our physical location or where our office might be based, that just to appreciate that there are these regions, these situations, these communities in almost every state, and so that a really strong after-school system really does need to take that into account, even if they are not a frontier state like Wyoming. They definitely have those regions within their boundaries.
Take as an example, California. Once you get out of the rural LA, San Diego, San Francisco areas, you've got a tremendous amount of rural programs right in Central California, mm-hmm. with internet problems, the same kind of things that other, that we would have, that we deal with.
Mm-hmm. So panelists, would love to hear what's one piece of advice you hope that everyone at today's session will take with them. What's something that you know now that you sure did wish that you knew then?
Who wants to start?
Well, I'm not sure it's so much what I know now, but I will say some of the things that I've heard are really powerful in that when one embarks on this work and then the programs really begin to adapt and adopt and really get involved with the work, we've heard many times that there are things that we can do at our program that don't cost any money. And those small things can make a huge difference for children. And so that ability to be able to step back, to do an observation, directors are there maybe every single day. So you think you're observing your program, but it's really different when you take that lens to quality and you're looking for certain indicators. And that also if you may have to take some time, and that's hard to come by in programs. But on the other hand, when you make that time to do it, and then you meet as a staff and have these conversations, and I think you can see from the chat boxes of some of the comments that some of the folks have been making from Wyoming, that has really made a difference for their program. So that's for me been really important.
And I think from my point of view as the director of the statewide network, I was determined to implement a statewide system for perpetuity. And so that meant never giving up, trying to overcome as problems arose, which they did, being creative and trying to figure out another angle, not letting those mountains get in the way of the work that we were doing. And I just want to put a plug in for anybody is that the last couple of years of my tenure, what we also did was develop program quality practices. We developed a self-assessment tool, and we also developed a user guide that was crosswalked with elements of program quality. And of course, NIOST was at our side doing that. And it took a while, but we have them now, and they're available on the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance website. We kind of did it backwards, but we have them now. And I think that those stable components are, there was never a program practices in the state before. There was not even a QRIS program in the state, a system in the state. So to have that available for programs to review and go over from time to time is very important.
I see that we have about 1 or 2 minutes left. And so I'd just like to conclude with a really important aspect of the work, which is it's all about relationships. So much of what we were able to do and continue to do has to do with people trusting each other, talking with each other, spending the time necessary to work on all of these initiatives, and to be patient. That's another important aspect of the work of Wyoming, is that we realized we weren't going to be able to rush into this work. We were going to take our time and do it well. So relationships, 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 it's all made it happen.
Thank you each so much. We wanted to close just by sharing a couple of resources that we mentioned in today's webinar. The book where you can learn even more about the wonderful process of building a statewide system of after school from the ground up. It's called Measure, Use, Improve, available from Information Age Publishing. The Program Practices, Self-Assessment, and User Guide that Linda just mentioned is available on the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance site, and there's a terrific how-to guide from NIOST called Coaching for Quality in Out-of-School Time. The Afterschool Alliance is going to make available the recording of today's session, as well as a PDF copy of this slide deck, so you'll have access to all those resources. For those of you who are on the call and who are interested in free and low-cost evaluation resources, we're working with the Alliance to set up another, the third of this now 3-part series. Stay tuned to the Alliance website and email list for more news about that session. We're figuring out the date right now. And again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Stay safe and healthy and well, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.